It's 1 o'clock. We'll get started this afternoon. Welcome back, everyone. Good afternoon to those who may just be joining us for the first time today, and welcome. This session is the Kansas City Museum, the seamless adaptation of a historic structure into a contemporary museum. And presenting today is Elizabeth Amirahmadi and Andy Short of International Architects Atelier. And they're going to tell us about some of the exciting changes that are going on at Corinthian Hall, Kansas City Museum. So take it away, guys.
Well, thank you so much for having us here. So it's our pleasure. And we would like to start with a brief history of the project. The building was constructed in 1910 by a long lumber baron, Mr. Long, and even that he was in the lumber business, this home is all concrete, masonry, and steel. And the only wood that you can find in there is actually on the flooring and the wall paneling. By 1934, Mr. Long dies, and in 1939, his daughters donate the property to the newly formed Kansas City Museum Association. In 1940, the actual museum opens for the first time. In 1948, facing difficulty maintaining this large estate, the association donates the actual physical grounds to the city of Kansas City, Missouri. And through the years, of course, the property goes through many renovations. And in 1978, the building was listed in the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I will now maybe give you a little bit of the timeline of our firm involvement with the project. And believe it or not, that was 25 years ago. We started back in 1996. And our first step was to do a building condition assessment. That was followed in 2000 with the programming and master plan for the building. Has changes were on the way. And, but as you are aware, with any publicly owned building, funding does not come easy. And our first stage, it was to secure the building exterior envelope. And it was between 2004 and 2002 was when we started the design to do the exterior masonry and roof work. And then we did have, back, it was in 2008 and 2009, we did exterior door and window replacement. And I will skip actually one more slide. You can see this one, it was really, the building has been neglected for many years. So there was really masonry work, and we completely had to work on the underlayment of the roof, both for all the slope and flat roofs. And with how I mentioned, we did the door and window replacement. And then it was back in the 2000 that we introduced air condition into this building for the first time in its life. So we did have the air conditioning equipment. We installed it in the attic, and from the attic, that equipment heats and cools the second and third floor, and that's with just two small areas that we needed to bring some of the ductwork down. And the equipment on the lower level actually provides that air conditioning and heating for that level and for the first floor. We did use a lot of the, given that the chimneys cannot be usable with the museum use, we did took advantage, and we used all the chimney stacks, and the silverware vault has a way to run that work and to minimize any intrusion. So as you walk right now through the project, you do not see any of the ductwork at all. In 2000, this is an image of the HVAC upgrades. In the left, you can see the attic. Well, already has some of the new ductwork. Prior to us getting involved with the project, it was just a storage for their decorations and extra furniture. And right now, it is very difficult to work in it because that attic is really truly full of mechanical equipment. And on the lower floor, we did have a lower ceiling elevations, and you can see there on these images on the corridor that all that ductwork, I mean, what the extent of the work to be able to introduce that air conditioning. So our current ductwork ended back in 2012, and our newest involvement starts in 2015 when the museum management moved to the city of Kansas City, Missouri, the Parks and Recreation Department, and Anna-Marie Tutera became the new museum director, and she has been instrumental in making this latest phase of work at the museum to become a reality and to open its door. I am going to let Andy talk about our approach, but before that, we did start it in 2016 with the programming and a master plan for not just Corinthian Hall, but for the entire estate, which includes the main building, which is Corinthian Hall. We do have stables, a caretaker home, a conservation, and of course, all of the grounds. And we also, given that we have a Parks and Recs property immediately to the west, also looking at some of that land. And so after that process, we started with the construction documents for the architectural work, and then it follows with the exhibit design and installation. Andy will be talking about how do we approach the our specific approach given the conditions of the building, because through the years, through all of those renovations, the level of the existing architectural fabric was very varied. And also, how did we overcame the challenge of humidity control and having power, AV, technology, security, and everything to be able to be accommodated into this 110-year-old mansion and to become a modern-day museum. So go ahead, Andy.
Thank you. So one of the big challenges that we had with the restoration and renovation of this building and turning it into a modern museum was that we wanted to maintain some level of climate control in at least some of the spaces, some of the gallery spaces, and that includes temperature as well as humidity control. Obviously, this building is load-bearing masonry for the most part, so there was no insulation or kind of weather tightness. So anything like that would have had to have been added as part of this project. So as Elizabeth mentioned, this building has been kind of dissected and pulled apart over its 75 plus years as a museum. So some parts of it, like you see on the left, are pretty well intact from what they originally were. Other parts of it, like the image you see on the right, have been chopped up and pipes removed, ceiling removed, painted and things removed. So that kind of started to guide us in looking at what we could start to remove from the building and what we felt was kind of a sacred thing that we needed to maintain. And that started to dictate not only how we were going to control the temperature and the humidity, but how we were going to start to do the exhibit design as well. So this is one example on the second floor of the building. The first thing we kind of did was look at in this existing wall section where we have the stone and the brick and the plaster, how does the temperature and humidity level change as it goes through the wall from the outside to the inside? The existing condition has been there, it was around for 100 years, and it survived pretty intact. When we started to look at if we just introduced humidification, active humidification into the building, what would that start to do to the wall? And it was fairly obvious, and I think it's generally well known that if you start doing that, you really have the potential to start destroying the inside of this stone as you get condensation and freezing and thawing. And so then we looked at, okay, well, where can we add insulation and vapor retarding to protect against that happening? What that meant was we would have to remove everything down to the masonry. And then also remove, the wood flooring and the ceilings so that we could install a continuous enclosure around the areas that we wanted to maintain these more strict temperature and humidity regulations on. So we looked at the areas that were already had most of the architectural fabric removed and started to look and see where we can maintain these different envelopes. And so this outline you see here in blue is one of the bigger areas, and that's kind of our more dense gallery space. And so that area is fully enclosed on the floor, the ceiling, and all the walls in order to keep the humidity from escaping into the rest of the building. So we have these sort of little miniature climate control zones throughout the building. So you can kind of see in progress, take everything down to the base structure, insulate everything, build new walls back in front where we could run all of our infrastructure, the power and the data, security rough-ins, and all of the other things we need for a modern museum. See here, we're moving parts of the floor as well. And then, removing the wood floor, maintaining that environment, and then putting the new wood floor down on top of it, and creating these sort of more neutral, white box type gallery spaces on the areas where we removed all the architectural fabric. So the other thing that differing stages of existing architectural elements also did was it started to impact how we were looking at restoring the building and how we were looking at putting exhibits in the building. Here we see this plan on the left is the lower level plan. There was really only one room that had elements kind of remaining in it. This number 1 billiards room here. The solution became a little more challenging when we got to the first floor, where we have, the grand hall, for example, the library, the salon here on the left side. Those really had a lot of the architectural elements left, and we really wanted to maintain those as much as we possibly could. The other pieces had, varying amounts of them left. So we wanted to be very distinct on being honest with what was original to the building and what we added back to sort of give the impression of what was there before. So we'll kind of walk through exactly, what we did in order to treat these various different kinds of spaces. The other thing too is on the upper floors, the second and third floors were originally bedroom suites for the family and the servants. Those original dividing walls between bedrooms and bathrooms and closets had all been removed over the years. And so really there was not much of this original remaining. And so that's why we decided to open a lot of these up. So you'll see in future photos, these became a lot of our gallery spaces where we had a lot more density in interpretive materials, including graphics and architects. So probably the main space that you'll see when you first come in is the grand hall. That's the entrance desk is there. And as originally, I kind of described, this room had a lot of its architectural fabric intact. It had been painted over many times over the years, so it had lost its original paint scheme. And it just mostly needed kind of a light touch in restoring it back to the way that it was originally. So through the use of paint analysis, we were able to look at the multiple layers of paint, kind of see what was the original paint scheme when the house was constructed. And we're able to sort of bring back that original paint scheme. Originally, the walls had a faux stone plaster finish with the joint lines grooved in it. So we brought that back as well. Because so much of this was remaining, we wanted to kind of bring it back to show this example of what this sort of grand room would have looked like at the time. We also had to deal with how do we bring all the infrastructure into this. So we've got to bring in speakers and lighting and AV and fire alarm and security. So we really wanted to do the least amount of impact to these spaces that we possibly could. So we'll kind of get into a little bit later how we did that and maintain as much of this original plaster work as we can. So here you see a finished photo of what the space looks like. You can see we have a little bit of the lighting here that were in the original locations, but we're not original light fixtures. So we kind of went with a more simplistic modern light so that it was clear what was original and what had been added. Another view, this is a sculpture that was originally in the house that had left. It was bought at an auction, and then someone returned it back to the museum in time for its opening. So, again, at the top of the grand stair, you see the grand hall here below. This again was their space with light touch, so we restored the original paint scheme. This was the original chandelier, so that was rewired, cleaned up, and put back into place. We had to do a little bit of plaster repair restoration. The salon was another room that really had a lot of its original architectural fabric in place. So again, we wanted a light touch here, just kind of minimal restoration repairs and conservation to bring back some of the original gold leaf. Again, decorative painting to bring back the original paint scheme. And then also poking in the elements that we needed, like the lighting and track lights and sprinklers and speakers, etc. And here you see the kind of final image of that. These fixtures as well were original to the room, so they were relamped and rewired and put back in. This is the original wood floor of the room, so it was refinished. We did not have the original chandelier, so this is, again, in the same location, a modern commissioned art piece that was installed there by the museum. So here's some of the rooms where it starts to get a little bit trickier to show what was original, what was not. So this is the dining room. All of the original wood paneling on this wall was removed. The museum did have some of it in storage, and the original plaster work was still in place, but it had been painted over gray as part of an exhibit that had been installed some time ago. So we brought back the original paint scheme on the original plaster work, and the amount of woodwork that we did have remaining, we were able to reconstruct one wall with the original woodwork. So what we did on the other walls was using the original or the historic photos and historic drawings that we had access to, is we sort of brought back we call it the kind of the ghost of the image of what the woodwork looked like before, sort of a simplified version with a different paint scheme. So you get the sense of what might have been there before, but we're very honest that that is not the original woodwork, and the stuff on the end that is the stained original walnut is the original woodwork. This is the original marble mantelpiece that was in several pieces in storage at the museum, brought back as well. So talking a little bit about infrastructure and how we were able to maintain some of the building, what we did was since we were demolishing much of the second floor above this area already, we ran almost everything in the interstitial space between the concrete slab and the wood flooring, so that we could only then have to poke through the visible elements into the ceilings below. So we're able to get speakers and sprinklers and lights and all of those kind of things into the ceiling of these first floor spaces without having to do a lot of demolition to run conduit and wiring and everything like that. So we wanted to make the lighting as minimal as possible, so we have little spotlights and track lights that we can focus on the artifacts. And there's another image of some items running in the ceiling, and as well as the minimal amount of openings required in those ceilings for those new objects. So looking again, this is another room where basically nothing was left except for the wood floor. So again, we reconstructed the sort of idea of what had been there before in terms of the beams that were there and the wood paneling, brought that back as well. It's another gallery space. The library was a room that required minimal intervention, just some plaster restoration, that's about it. The sun parlor became the museum store. So that was, again, just sort of removing paint that had been on the stone walls, touching up the lights in the skylights, and then bringing back some modern light fixtures in the original fixture locations. This is the breakfast room, which serves as an ancillary space to the cafe. And so this space, again, had a lot of the original plasterwork. It just needed to be brought back to the original paint scheme. We had restored the stained glass windows during the door window replacement about 10 years ago. And there you see the finished product. So the kitchen was another space that basically none of the original elements were left. This room had been originally subdivided into pantries and restroom and kitchen staff dining. So in order to make this the cafe for the museum, we wanted to sort of reflect what had been there before. So in the ceiling planes are the original divisions of the room. So it's sort of divided up in the ceiling where it could be divided in the floor. One of the other challenges we had to deal with as well was in terms of the humidity control and code required egress for existing buildings, was we did have to separate the stairs from the rest of the space. And so what we did were we had to install solid partitions, both for humidity control and for egress, was we went to a lot of glass partitions, fully glass partitions, so that we could maintain that visibility where you could still see the original elements, and that these insertions into the space took away from the original architecture the minimal amount possible. There you can see the expense of what had to be done on that upper floor in terms of removing the flooring and restoring the plasterwork. So we talked earlier about a lot of the gallery spaces on the second and third floor had been opened up over time, and the walls had been opened up, and so a lot of these spaces really had to be kind of stripped back to the masonry and then rebuilt as sort of kind of white box gallery spaces. Going down to the lower level, this is the billiard room. This again was a room where we had some original fabric. The original beams were there and the fireplace was there. So we left those and restored those pieces and then brought back the surrounding materials. The corridor we talked about also a little bit earlier, and that was used to run a lot of the ductwork, and what that in turn did was it really encroached on our headspace. So in addition to that, the lower level floor was at multiple different floor heights. So we removed the entire floor, repoured a consistent flooring height down there, and we're able to gain about 6 inches down there in order to increase the overall head height. And because the ductwork went down that central corridor, the ductwork kind of was in an arch shape. So we kind of mimicked that with our ceiling plane so that we could kind of gain the maximum amount of headroom possible. This is the stair leading out of the lower level. And the pattern for these grills was based on a pattern in the leaded glass in the library. So trying to bring back some of those elements to even some of the more modern touches in the museum. So just to finish up a little bit, the exhibits are being installed currently. The museum opens in 2 days. So we just wanted to share a few of the exhibit artifact installations and graphic panels that were designed by Gallagher & Associates and are being fabricated and installed by Kubrick Multi. So in the rooms where we have a lot of historical fabric, we wanted the exhibits as well to have a light touch in those rooms. We felt that the rooms themselves were kind of artifacts in and of themselves. So a lot of these rooms where we have like the library and the salon, we have these pylons that are freestanding, and we have platforms that have graphic panels on them and freestanding cases that show different artifacts. And then when we start to get into, and again, these panels on the wall, trying to minimally touch those where we can. And then when we start to get to the upper floors, we have a much more dense amount of collections on display. So you'll start to see there, where we had those kind of white box gallery spaces, the platforms were much more densely populated with artifacts, and the walls were used for graphics and multiple layers of filters. But we did want to keep some of the original fabric, so that's why on the image on the right, you do see original radiator enclosures and the windows. We didn't want to completely screen the windows off. The light is filtered coming through those, but we felt that you needed to see that you were still in this house. We didn't want it to be that you could be anywhere. This house, I think, even though the upper floors are somewhat more clean, I think we still wanted to maintain that feel throughout. And then in addition to showcasing the collections of the museum, as part of the 1% for Art program through the city of Kansas City, Missouri, we do have some contemporary art installations that were integrated into the architecture of the building, as well as some commissioned pieces that the museum put together as well. So that was our very quick presentation. We appreciate everyone listening to that, and I think we have about 4 or 5 minutes left for some questions, if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, so yeah, please, if you have questions, enter them in the Q&A option. I do want to ask, so on a historic structure like this, did you pursue, or are you able to pursue LEED certification on anything?
We did not. We had an exemption from the city for that. We did try to maintain. The biggest problem was the climate controls on this project was a challenge with the existing envelope that we were trying to maintain. We did wherever we could. We kind of held those sustainable principles in terms of the materials that were used and the processes that were used. We did try to make the envelope as efficient as we could where we could. But again, there was just some struggles with trying to work with that existing architecture.
Yeah, thank you. And it's beautiful work. It really is. It looks incredible. I have a question from Cheryl Mush, who says, did you need to install an elevator for ADA compliance?
Yes.
Yeah, there was originally an elevator in the building when it was built in 1910. I think that stopped working.
That started working back in the late 90s. And actually that was the first commercial elevator installed west of the Mississippi.
In a residence.
In a residence. So we, the museum decided that we are keeping that elevator station on the lower floor. And we do have a window into the equipment for that elevator. And back in the early 90s, it's a long story with the then city manager, but they requested for a new elevator at the direction of that city manager to be installed ASAP, and the servant stair was actually converted and installed a new elevator on that location.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, you say the museum reopens on Thursday?
Yes.
Yep, it does. So it's you have to make reservations, mostly just due to COVID, but it is free to the public. So if you're in Kansas City, if you want to check it out, it's a good introduction to other museums in the city. So it's kind of, the goal of the museum is really to try and tell a lot of the untold stories of the city. So you'll learn, I think, a lot of different things about a lot of different parts of the city. And then it's sort of a gateway to go explore other things you may learn about in other places.
Yeah, there is a second floor. I mean, the first floor, you learn more about the mansion and the history of the property, while on the second floor, there is a timeline of the history of Kansas City, Missouri. And on the third floor, actually, it is focused on it's going to be development into the neighborhood and the residents of Kansas City, where there is going to be a neighborhood will be showcased every so many months. And in how Andy mentioned, it is the goal is for this museum to be a gateway into the city of Kansas City and the other museums and institutions.
That's great. All right. Well, Elizabeth and Andy, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing the renovated museum. To everyone else, at 1:45, there is the membership museum coming up, membership meeting coming up. So thank you all for attending this afternoon.
Thank you.